Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Hansen. I'm Vice President for Studies at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And I want to welcome you to this event, especially to our members. A special welcome to you. This is a conversation about the most consequential relationship in the world, to talk about the relationship between US and China and how we expect it to evolve in 2021. Before we get started, please note that the Council is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that takes no institutional positions on policy issues, and the views expressed by the participants on the program are their own. I also want to thank the Chinese People's Association for Peace and Disarmament for all of their assistance in organizing this event. In particular, I want to thank the CPAPD's Deputy Secretary General, Tao Tao, and the rest of your team for all the assistance with this event. And lastly, we want to invite you to ask questions during this event. And in order to do that, please go to the website ccga.live. Just type that right into your browser, ccga.live. And you can follow the on-screen prompts where you'll be able to submit a question or vote on those submitted by others. So let us go. I'd like to welcome a really esteemed guests and panel for this conversation today. We have with us Zhang Weiwei, who is the Distinguished Professor of International Relations and Director of the China Institute at Fudan University. He's a board member of China's National Think Tanks Council, as well as a senior fellow at the Zhongqiu Institute. Joining us as well is Hua Zhangwo, who is the Vice Chairman of the China Society for World Trade Organization Studies. He also serves as the President of Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation in the Ministry of Commerce. The third person joining this panel is David Edelman, who served as the 15th US ambassador to Singapore, and he concluded his service there in 2013. And rounding out our panel is James Steinberg, who is a university professor of social science, international affairs, and law at Syracuse University. And he served as Deputy Secretary of State from 2009 to 2011. Welcome to you all. We're really very honored to have you here for this conversation. To set up our discussion, we're going to have very brief introductory comments by each of our panel members. And if you could limit yourself to 2 minutes, I understand was the agreement, which I understand is a very short period of time, but just to kind of set some of the context so that we can pick up the conversation from there. And Professor Zhang, let me ask you to start for us.
Well, topic given to me is China's national policy and China's foreign policy. I think, I will make perhaps 4 or 5 points here. Point one, to understand China today, it's crucial to understand the Chinese Communist Party. Because the US mainstream media, it's communist with C in capital letter. It's already a negative tone. But within China, you have to understand, CCP, Communist Party of China, is an overwhelmingly positive force in the minds of most Chinese. So this is ABC of China today. Otherwise, you cannot have a clear understanding of China today. And it has to do with this, the Americans blame the one-party structure. Actually, China has been governed by one-party structure since 221 BC, over 2,200 years ago, since when China was first unified. It's always governed by under kind of unified ruling entity. Otherwise, the country broke up. It's a country I call amalgamation of hundreds of states into one over its long history. So this is the first point. Second point is concerning the objective of China's domestic policy. Well, this is a long story, but let me try to focus on the party's plenum, 5th plenum held last October, which set out the 14th five-year plan, plus a long-term plan for the year 2035. Essentially, the objective of this plan is to turn China into a middle-level socialist developed country. If we have to use the per capita GDP, it will be pretty, from my own study, closer to or equivalent to that of Spain or Italy today. Yeah, of course, it's still far below the US per capita GDP. However, China is a socialist country. For instance, I live in Pudong. Pudong now has already 30,000 US dollars per capita GDP, but the real living standard is much higher than Hong Kong, which has more than 50,000 US dollars. So we are very proud of the fact that we are a socialist country. But the United States prefer capitalism. You can stay with your system. We do not envy you. So let's have our separate systems and we can compete peacefully, no problem. And we can cooperate and compete. The strategy seems to be put forward by many people here and the United States as well. Now, the third point is the objective foreign policy. Due to China's focus on peace and development, so the foreign policy is also peace and development. That has been a consistent theme for several decades now. And in the Chinese mind, which is slightly or very different from the American mainstream view, the American mainstream view is either friend or foe. So it's clear-cut, zero-sum game. The Chinese approach is always a friend or potential friend. So this is different. Behind this, I would say it's a different historical tradition. The Chinese one, as you know, China is one of the very few countries, large countries, that has never experienced religious wars. So different religions can coexist and borrow and learn from each other. So from this tradition, we think win-win is so part of the game every day, you know, why we cannot win-win for both China and United States. And so this is also the message from China foreign policy. And number four, we should learn some lessons from the recent past. I think we should try to avoid misperceptions. One lesson is this trade war against China launched by Donald Trump. I think most people, even the United States, in the Biden administration view this kind of approach is perhaps wrong. And it's not winning the war, but it's losing the war. The second is this fanfare about so-called the new Cold War. And China is not Soviet Union, China not ideological power. And China already the largest economy by purchasing power parity. China is the world's largest middle class, 400 million people, real middle class with properties, with decent income. When they go to the United States, they're also middle class. And China is also the largest consumer society today. And China has 130 countries as its largest trading partners. China is their largest trading partners. There's no way to contain China. Rather, we should have cooperations and a win-win situation. And finally, this morning I was watching CNN because Joe Biden announced this new executive order, a kind of warlike action against COVID-19, which is great and necessary. I heard Dr. Fauci said that he has a kind of liberating feeling. I think this is the right word, you know. The key message from Chinese experience over the past 4 decades is emancipation of the mind, and then seeking truth from facts, from hard facts. So this will be great. I think even the United States is considering new reforms. I think perhaps this idea of liberating of mind and seeking truth from facts could be very helpful. And lastly, in conclusion, this whole idea of Cold War is based on this premise. It's called the mutually assured destruction, or MAD. I think at this moment, China and the United States are at the crossroad, and we're in a really interesting time. We have every reason to seek what I call mutually assured prosperity. Rather than MAD, we should have MAP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Ambassador Edelman next.
Thank you. And thank you to the Chicago Council for the honor of being part of this panel with distinguished academics and diplomats. And thank you to the many business leaders who I know are participating as part of this session this evening. I'll be very brief. When I think about US-China relations in 2021, we have to start with, I think, what's happened over the last 4 years, where US-China relations, unfortunately, have suffered a setback. The Trump administration's policies towards China I think, have been marked by this zero-sum game to which a professor referred just a few minutes ago, and the use of very blunt instruments to prosecute grievances the United States or President Trump personally may have had, mainly in the form of heavy-hitting sanctions and very broad-based, far-reaching, across-the-board tariffs that have led to the trade war in which we find ourselves today. So I think the first half of this year represents a true opportunity to reset this US-China relationship. And the only way to do so is to begin to restore some trust. I think that there are two main ways we can do that. First, I think there are certainly areas of mutual interests that are global issues that can only be successfully addressed with strong and intense cooperation between Washington and Beijing. Climate change, for example, comes to mind. Public health crises such as that has overcome us over the last year or so, the coronavirus, represent another. There are also the more traditional confidence building types of measures that the Biden administration can quickly engage in. In Beijing, led by President Xi, people-to-people type of programs, easing some of the restrictions on visas and some of the impediments there have been to exchange of scholars, exchange of students, and the like. I would just finally add that I think this opportunity to reset US-China relations in 2021 has only a relatively small window. And the reason is because we now have a new president who will enjoy what in American society we refer to as a honeymoon. And he is now in his completed his first full day of his honeymoon. And the honeymoons do not last long in modern American politics. Before too long, we will be in the throes of the mid-term election cycle. And some of the sort of more aggressive China hawks that follow the Trump policies as a means for their electoral success will begin to have stronger voices and in effect have I think, less than constructive impact on the Biden administration's ability to reset this US-China relationship. With that, I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Hua, please, next.
Okay, I'm glad to attend this seminar, and I think it's a good opportunity for both China and American scholars to get better understanding. And towards this topic about China's domestic policy, I think the most important thing is just now we have a new plan, or we can say it's a new development patterns. That means we'll have relying on the big domestic market circulation, and at the same time we'll build up domestic and international circulation. And this is a very new initiative, and it's issued by the China Yearly Economic Conference, and also the 5th session of the 19th Parties Congress. And so now Chinese people, I think it's a very clear, or it's a better understand of all these plans or the patterns. And in China, we often say we are entering a new era. That means from 2021 to 2035. Within this long time, we have a future prospect for the modern China. And also from 2021 to 2025, we call that is the 14th five-year plan. I believe the dual circulation pattern will be pushed within the whole 14 years plan. And toward this new policy, I think some people still have some misunderstand or not thoroughly understand it. That means some people think China's this adjustment means China will turn back to domestic and will give up the foreign economy. I think this is not very correct, because the fact is China, in the past 40 years, China relying on opening and reform and this basic development theory. And we changed China a lot. And now China growing up and the domestic market is really big. It can support China's economy. So that's why China stressed on the dual circulation. And that also includes the foreign economy or foreign oriented economy. I think that's very important, because we can see the facts. China's most of the materials are imported, and we rely heavily on the imports of the production materials, such as like the oil or gas or copper or even soybeans, as the percentage is very high. So if without this, we will very difficult in the manufacture or in the domestic economic development. And that's important. And the second reason is China is a big trading country. It's biggest exporting country. That's true. And even for last year, under the pandemic, China's export still growing very strong, because there are some unequal development and demands. So if China give up the exports, I think that will be influence the unemployment. That's the most important thing, because China needs to considering the unemployment and considering the people's living standards. And that's what I want to stress on the dual circulation. I don't know whether it's quite special expert words to say it. Or we say it's a new development circulation pattern. Second, I just want to talk about the opening up of China's economy, because we noticed China have many new events in the last year or in the past few years. The first event is China launched the free trade pilot zone areas, and first at Shanghai, and now we have 21. Almost most of the provinces we have free trade pilot areas. That's for the high level opening experiment. So now I think it's going very further. And the year before, we also take Hainan province as a free trade harbor for the experiment. That shows China really try to make breakthrough. And second is we should notice China issued a new foreign investment law, and it's from this from 2020 the first it's launched. That's a very important event, and this new law take most of the rules from the world practice, and it's really can protect the foreign investment. That's and also some other things is China breaks through the agreement with the RCEP. I think that's a big event, because China needs to show some high opening up policy and to grant this agreement. Another thing is for the CAI, that's the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment with EU. That's China also made some breakthrough on the opening up, such like will considering the labor unions some requirements, and also as some transparent and the discrimination such issues, and also another thing is by November last year, China announced will prepare to consider to joining the CPTPP. Everyone knows CPTPP is have a whole set of high level standard, and so some people doubt whether China can enter the CPTPP, can grant the conditions or the rules regulations of the CPTPP. We also think it's a difficult thing, but that shows China like to push all the reforms towards the high level opening. So that is an important thing. In China, most of the scholars now are concerned about the high level opening regulations or the rules. Even we packed on the WTO reforms. So all these things shows China really getting prepared to make some breakthroughs on the high level opening up. So that's the truth. So because China is very big, how can we cover all this work? It's not so easy. So China like to have some pilot areas or in some fields to do it first, and then if we get a better result, then we can push it forward. So and all these development, I think, I also will support China's economic development. And if China can keep economic steadily and consistently move forward, I think that's a contribution to the world. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And then Jim Steinberg, let me wrap up the opening with you.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks to all the listeners for being here. So we have time for conversation. I'm going to be very brief and very pointed. Right now, of course, it's understandable. There's a lot of focus in terms of the future of U.S.-China relations on the new Biden administration and how much things will or won't change with the new administration. And undoubtedly, there will be some changes. And I think for your listeners who are interested, I recommend an article that was just published by two leading voices in the new administration on this issue, Jake Sullivan, the new National Security Advisor, and Kurt Campbell, the coordinator for Asia policy in the White House, which can give you a good sense of what they're thinking about this. But from my point of view, and I think more broadly in understanding where we're going, the big fact is not the change in Washington, but the question of whether there is going to be any change in Beijing, because we may have a new president in the United States. We do not have a new president in China. And from the perspective of almost every American who has any involvement in this issue, whether it's in the executive branch or Congress or in the media or even in the public, the negative trajectory in U.S.-China relations over the last decade is largely attributable to actions taken by the Chinese government, not by the U.S. government. There are some criticisms of what Trump has done, but what you've heard in the last 24 hours from Secretary of State designate Tony Blinken, from the new Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, is a reaffirmation that the principal problem facing the United States is the China threat. And so if there's going to be a change in U.S.-China relations, there's going to have to be change coming from Beijing. And I think that's the big question mark in the eyes of Americans and the new administration. I think there's an openness to go in a different direction, but it's tremendously going to depend, and largely going to depend, on whether there's a clear signal that China's not waiting for Biden to solve the problem in the relationship, because from the perspective of Biden and certainly from the Congress, that's not largely where the problem has come. It's not because of Trump. It's not because of Trump's policies, but it's because of the new assertiveness, a new set of approaches China has pursued over the last decade. And so that's where we have to look. And I think, the question to our Chinese colleagues and to the eyes of most Americans is, will things change?
So that's a great place to pick up the conversation and to go forward, and to combine that with Ambassador Edelman's point of there is a narrow window where there is most opportunity for policy flexibility. So I would love to ask our Chinese colleagues in this panel, what do you expect? What do you think we might see from the Chinese government in order to reach out to and try to initiate the kinds of changes that could drive a shift in the relationship? Either one of you is welcome to start.
Yeah, I will say a few words on that. In the first place, if you read the statements by Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, they have already sent a few interesting messages to the US administration. We are ready for better relations between China and the United States. Perhaps, I think I agree to Ambassador Edelman's comment. There is a window opportunity which could be quite limited in time. Both sides should seize it. Otherwise, there'll be years of problems. And so, as both Professor Stenback and Dr. Edelman are senior diplomats, and I think in diplomacy you talk about sophisticated approach, and perhaps two countries can start simultaneously from different angles. Otherwise, it's about blame game, as Professor Stenback tries. It's China's problem, and China was its US problem, and then there'll be no solution. We should be more sophisticated than Donald Trump. And his approach, Pompeo's approach, is too black and white and simple and naive, to be honest, and which is not working. And from our point of view, from my point of view, if you look at the statements by Joe Biden, he talked about the challenges faced by the United States, the unprecedented pandemic, the economic recession, the climate change, and racial divide. These four major challenges for the United States. For the racial divide, we cannot do much about it. That's a US problem. You have to sort it out. But for the other three, pandemic, economic situation, and climate change, United States needs China's help, indeed. And China is in a unique position to help United States, unless you reject that. So I think there's good, ample ground for cooperation, but we have to seize the time and seize the opportunity.
So, Mr. Let me ask and pick up directly on what you spoke about, which was the new strategy of the dual circulation strategy. Some people are concerned in this country. One of the things that people have said is that this could just reinforce the pulling away of our two economies. Now you pointed out very clearly that China has an interest in exports. But there also is a sense that there's a very strong building Chinese capacity in a way that replaces the interconnection between the US and Chinese economy on particularly technology goods. And certainly the Trump administration initiated that withdrawal on the US side. But as you look at this new economic strategy, do you see the potential for initiatives coming from China to try to reach out to the US and embrace a common a potential for a common policy agenda in any of the economic areas, or is this really kind of a stabilization of tensions that developed under the Trump administration that are going to continue?
Good, very good question, because most people will consider all these problems. In China, we also have some argument, not that serious, because this policy is decided by the central committee, so we all followed it. But at the beginning, I think it's when make this decision, it's really considered the world situation, the protectionism and the globalization with some problems, and also the Donald Trump, China and Americans conflicts. I think we all considered this outside situation. And it seemed it makes stress on the self-reliance and independence. There's something like this. But actually, when you see the plans, when you want to make the plan or fulfill the plans, you found you can't turn back. You have to under the opening up. So later we found, I think the outside world will see China turning on high level opening up, because that's the only way to make it more streamlined. And also domestically, we still have some problems, even including the production, the circulation or logistics, and even the income distribution and the consumption. These four fields is the main problem we need to tackle it. If we can make, because we are talking more about the supply side, and now we are talking about the demand side, that means we are concerned more about the consumption. If we have enough consumption, then China's economy is no problem. So, but most people think we can't give up the foreign economy. That means the exports or even the investment, foreign investment to China. So in this field, we still think it's very important. I don't know whether I answered your question, because it's a very complicated question.
Yeah, thank you. And Ambassador Edelman, let me bring you into this conversation, because you pointed to a potential window of openness. And Jim pointed to really a call for the first move to come from China. How do you view this issue, and where do you see the greatest potential for the kind of cooperation that could start moving the relationship in a more positive direction, as you laid out?
Well, a lot of the conversation tonight has been about economics, trade, and investment, and I do want to get back to that. But there are some important core areas on which mutual cooperation should not be controversial. Talked about climate, talked about public health, counterterrorism could be one. Anti-privacy, anti-piracy type of efforts. That have been areas where Beijing and Washington can easily see a path together. So those while they're very big and very difficult issues, I think they represent areas where there can be almost immediate change in the relationship. This all goes hand in hand with a more conciliatory tone coming from both Beijing and Washington than we have experienced over the last 4 years. I think that Secretary Steinberg, Dr. Steinberg, appropriately points to the last 10 years as a time during which their relations have been deteriorating. But I think the deterioration has been most pronounced during the Trump administration over the last 4 years. Now, with regard to economics, look, I know it's exciting in China that the economy is undergoing an important transformation in the development of domestic purchasing power and the depth of the domestic economy. But the truth is, both the United States economy and the economy in China depends on global growth. And it's the interconnectedness or interdependence, if you will, that will drive true global growth. So in that case, we're set up perfectly for cooperation. The United States has a stake in Chinese economic success, and China has a stake in American economic success, because those are the two locomotives that will pull the train and lead to global growth. Now, what we've seen on the trade side, especially over the last 4 years, in my view, has been disastrous. And we can have a big conversation about who started it, who made the first move, and who may need to make the first move with regard to resetting the trade and investment relationship. But candidly, the very broad-based tariffs that were put into place by the Trump administration have, as was mentioned, not only harmed the global growth, but specifically, I think, had a dragging effect on the American economy. There undoubtedly is a place for the use of tariffs with regard to certain products and certain industries. And there's a separate conversation to have around export controls and the protection of intellectual property. But using broad-based tariffs to prosecute all of American grievances against China has been, in my view, very unsuccessful. And I think the Trump administration in sort of the third and fourth year almost made an admission without saying so through actions by granting exclusions, that seemed at times to be somewhat arbitrary, but going through this process of applications for product exclusions that carved out billions of dollars from those tariffs sort of proves the case, the exception swallowing the rule, if you will. My hope is, and the politics are going to be very difficult on the Biden administration, but my hope is there is a new fresh look and a more sophisticated view of the way tariffs are used by the incoming USTR and the administration. And I think that could, and I hope that will be interpreted in Beijing as a move towards, some depressurizing, taking some of the pressure out of the U.S.-China trade debate and relationship. We can go on and on all night about impediments to cross-border investment, and we can talk about promises made, promises kept in some of the deals over the years. But I hope everyone participating tonight can agree, for purposes of global growth, the United States needs China and China needs the United States. And in my view, that's a pretty good starting point to try to rebuild trust and rebuild a successful economic relationship.
So, Professor Steinberg, let me come back to you. And one of the things that's true about the leadership of the foreign policy leadership of the Biden administration is there's a lot of continuity. There's a lot of familiar faces of people who've held senior positions in previous administrations, many people very, very well. In terms of the relationship with China and the way that the U.S. officials are thinking, do you see fundamental changes in kind of the principles that are going to guide this relationship going forward? And if so, what are those going to be, or what are those really strong continuities going to be?
So, I think that there are important differences on many issues with the Trump administration, but my message for tonight is one should not underestimate the similarities on the issue of China. I want to take the liberty of reading to you the lead in the Wall Street Journal following Secretary Blinken's testimony yesterday to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Antony Blinken, who served as Deputy Secretary of State during the Obama administration, agreed with GOP senators in his confirmation hearing that previous optimistic approaches to China were flawed and backed the tougher approach, if not the tactics, that President Trump adopted. And I think that's quite an important thing to take away, which is I do think there are big changes. And I think that for better or for worse, the views of people who served in the Obama administration, at least on China, have changed. And they have a different view about what China is up to. And that's, I think, really the key question here, is that it is a different assessment about China's goals and objectives. And that's why the problem is so fundamental. And while I agree with all of our colleagues in the fact that there are opportunities for cooperation, if the deep diagnosis is that China is challenging the United States, and in Tony's words, challenging our interests and our values, then it's going to be very hard to sustain and insulate these areas that are theoretically areas of cooperation, like climate change or the economy, from this deeper conflict. And so I think it is going to be difficult to sort of compartmentalize these different aspects of the relationship and think that we can be serious rivals when it comes to security in the Indo-Pacific area, towards cyber threats, towards China's military development, towards its bullying of its neighbors like Australia and Taiwan, and to think that somehow we're going to be able to somehow say, well, because we have these areas where we have common interests, we can just work on those while we fight vigorously on the others. I think we have got to find a way to deal with these deeper challenges and to come to some understanding about whether we really do have a way to use the words that Jake Sullivan and Kurt Campbell used, which is, can we coexist in a way that is not threatening to each other? And can we convince each other that we're serious about that? I think that's the core, and that's the change that's taken place since the Obama administration, even though the names and faces are the same.
So I just want to follow that up with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs has been doing public opinion polling on the U.S. public since 1974. And in full disclosure, Professor Steinberg is part of a group that helps design the survey. But a couple of pieces that just reinforce the shift in the United States, which is not only at the policymaking level, but also that we've seen inside the public. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, we found when we surveyed this summer that a majority of Americans, 55%, said that the development of China as a world power is a critical threat to the United States. One of the striking things is it was identified as the #1 most important threat by people identify as Republicans. So this was, 67% of Republicans, 53% of independents, and 47% of Democrats. And in terms of kind of that politics, and do you see that the right approach is friendly cooperation and engagement with China, or actively working to limit China's growth? It was very evenly split. 47% of Americans said that friendly cooperation and engagement was the policy to pursue, and 49% said actively working to limit China's growth was a problem. So we see, and we've talked about domestic politics, that within the United States, there is also some domestic political pressure, which can be mobilized by politicians in order to, which can make it, would reinforce the kind of dynamic that we've been talking about. I guess our time, it goes so quickly, and I was wondering if we could go around the group, the panel, and if people could suggest a concrete positive action that could be taken that could make a meaningful difference in the direction that this relationship evolves and takes. And I think certainly it's a complicated relationship. No one action or area is going to, is going to be a magic bullet for moving us forward. But kind of what, and I invite, on either side, a step by the Chinese, step by the United States, what would be a really important move to help us move forward in a positive direction? I'll start with you, Professor Zhang.
Well, as we are now at a critical moment and also interesting time, and for Joe Biden, his age, 78 or something, it reminds me of Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping when he came back to power, also in his mid-70s, that he began the most brilliant time of his career. In other words, to improve China-US relations, we need a breakthrough. We need a statesman. We need a long vision. There's no way to contain China. It will be 100% case of failure. Yeah, because we have found a way to success. And China, on the part of China, no problem whatsoever to have a good win-win situation, cooperation with the United States. It's a tremendous opportunity, world's largest market. And the Chinese people, peace-loving people, if you look at Chinese history, we are a nation that built great war to fend off wars, not to make aggressions I remember Jimmy Carter said, if you look at US history, over the past 250 years, only 16 years we did not fight a war. But in the case of China, for 4 decades, we have no war whatsoever. So I think, have a new idea, fresh thinking, liberating feeling, emancipation of mind. We'll find a way out. There are all kinds of approach to better relations than one suggested by Professor Steinbach. Sorry, I say this very candidly.
We want a candid discussion. That's good. Ambassador Edelman, what would you suggest?
Well, let me first take the liberty, if you don't mind, and just saying I really appreciate Jim's realism, and I think he's spot on that there's been some shift in the sort of former Biden brain trust, if you will. Nonetheless, my interpretation of testimony and confirmation hearings before the United States Senate is to take it a little bit with a grain of salt. I think that Secretary-designate Blinken understands his audience is looking for an overwhelming vote in favor of his confirmation, and it's sort of very easy to win favor in Congress by publicly speaking strongly with regard to China. My hope is that as he moves with his team into the State Department and others move in to the NSC and to the White House, that they will be asking themselves exactly the question that you have just posed to us. One sort of very significant, I think, step could be, and it need not be one side or the other necessarily taking the initiative, but early summitry. I think doing something early with regard to a Biden and Xi meeting with an agenda that sort of focuses on these potential areas of mutual cooperation, as difficult as they may be to compartmentalize, as Jim has, I think, rightfully pointed out, would be constructive.
Very good. Mr. Hua, what would you suggest as a concrete action that could be taken?
I think at present, especially under the pandemic, China and the United States needs to go to the table to start the negotiations as early as possible. Because when China and America can have some consensus or can keep down the serious competition or the fighting, avoid of fighting. That's most important thing in this world. And this will give out a good signal to the world economy. And I think the whole world are still concerned about the China and American competitions and fights, conflicts. So that's still comes to the first important thing. And China needs to be more active, and Americans should consider these negotiations. And we need a new contract or a new arrangement for the futures. That's most important. Because if China can accept some high-level opening up, or if China can admit the market-oriented reforms, things will become more easier.
Very good. And Professor Steinberg, you've got the last opportunity for the positive suggestion for how to move us forward.
Right, and I have a very practical one, which is I think both sides should roll back the restrictions that they've imposed on each other for visits, especially by journalists and academics on both sides. There have been tit for tat set of arrangements so that Chinese scholars can't come here. Chinese journalists have been expelled from the United States. And similarly, many US academics whose views are not necessarily in agreement with the Chinese leadership have been excluded from China as well as journalists. So I think on both sides, we're to step back and say, this is a place where we can have a fresh start and a fresh page. We're going to remove those restrictions on both sides. It's a very reciprocal step. And it would signal a sign of greater openness and accepting of each other. I think that could lead to some of the more important, larger things that my colleagues have talked about tonight.
So I want to thank everyone on this panel for a really very good discussion and a frank exchange. I think one of the things that will be important and is important in any critical relationship is the ability to be able to talk frankly, to share perspectives where there are shared views and where there are differences. So I just want to thank all the panelists for engaging this conversation in that spirit of frankness. I also want to thank everyone who tuned in via Zoom, and also remind you that a recording of this conversation will be available for playback on the Council's social channels and the website very shortly. Thanks very much for tuning in. Thanks to our panelists. I look forward for what will be a continued discussion of this very important topic. Thank you.